Here we go. Great. Okay, so you already got a really good overview of what I'm going to talk about today. Um, I'm a professor, so this is really about research. And what I hope to do is to explain to you the research that we conducted on, this question, uh, whether we can promote democracy online through social media advertisement. And does it work? For what kind of outcome does it work? And so on. And what I want to do today is kind of show you proper experimental evidence of the promising use of these kind of methods to spread the word, to educate people about the virtues of democracy. The motivation of this project is something that you're all very much aware of. We see many countries, unfortunately, backsliding, and here there's a kind of comparison of how many countries are democratizing versus those that are backsliding in 2024 versus 20 years ago. And you see that so many more countries are now at danger where democracy is challenged, and way fewer countries are now democratizing. Um, what really puzzles me and motivated me also to do this research is that a lot of these leaders that dismantle democracy, that challenge democratic norms and practices in their countries, are elected through popular support. They come in through normal, fair, and free elections. They then start dismantling their democratic institutions, but we don't necessarily see, masses of people then challenging this. And there is actually genuine support for many of these leaders that do people like what what these leaders are doing. And kind of quoting here, sorry. A famous political scientist, Larry Diamond from Stanford, who said, for democracy to endure, their leaders and citizens must internalize the spirit of democracy. So this is really the challenge here, right? So if citizens do not internalize the spirit of democracy, they are vulnerable, they are, kind of drawn to these kind of strongman rule and so on. So this is our starting point. Yeah. So the spirit of democracy, the way I think about it is, to love democracy is to understand it, to value it, and ultimately to fight for it. Yeah. So this is the challenge for us, yeah, as educators. How do we achieve this? That people internalize the spirit of democracy. If the goal is to make sure that people actually understand what democracy is, because a lot of people think they live in a democracy, they think they understand democracy. And a lot of these leaders that I just showed you, they often say that what they are doing is to save democracy in their country. But of course, it isn't, right? So that's the first thing. We need to understand it and not be blinded and misinformed about, certain actions being in defense of democracy while they really aren't. I think that, with any kind of sports you might do, I live in the UK, being originally from Germany. This was the first time that I encountered cricket, which is a very strange sport if you don't come from the UK or British former colony. But once somebody actually sat me down and explained to me what cricket is, so I understood it. I understood the rules. I understood what these guys are doing when they're running around and kind of pitching the ball. Then I start valuing it. I understood why people are into it, and I saw the fun of it. And it's the same with democracy. Yeah, we first need to understand it, to value it, to be passionate about it, to identify with it. And I think only if we truly do that, if we really internalize the spirit, as Diamond said, this is when we're then ready to fight for it. Yeah, going on the streets, punishing politicians that do anti-democratic things. But we need these things first. Okay, so this is the starting point. How can we get this? Yeah, that is the question. How can we make the case for democracy? How can we educate people to become democratic, to understand democracy and internalize this spirit? This is where, of course, civic education comes from. And I do not have to, kind of spell out the importance of civic education. Obviously, for a lot of you, that's your bread and butter, and kind of the goals, what we're trying to achieve with this. But the challenge that I'm sure that you also have faced, and that, you come up, many of you probably came up with like really, original, innovative ideas here, but how can we design these programs? It's a big challenge, right? That I just set out. And when I talk about civic education in my research, I'm talking about adult civic education. So I'm not talking about school education, civic education. That's obviously really important too, to reach young people, to lay the foundation when they're most impressionable. But the key to strengthen democracy is also to educate adults. And thinking about new democracies, for example, right? We have Eastern Europe, which was a dictatorship for many years and then became democratic relatively rapidly. Most people in that time, in the 90s, did not go to school anymore. Yeah, so it is absolutely crucial that in new democracies we also educate adults. The problem is that a lot of the programs are often kind of preaching to the converted. We reach people that already are quite pro-democratic. Yeah, it is very difficult to reach people who are more skeptical, who are more maybe switched off. They're not that political. Yeah, younger people, women. There's certain groups that are much more difficult to reach. Yeah, and with the rise of social media, where a lot of us now get information through certain channels, I think this challenge of the ideological echo chambers have really increased this problem. Yeah. So that's the first challenge, as I see it. Yeah, extending the reach. We need more people to hear the message. And the second is, if we want to reach more people, you have to do that in a cost-effective way. Yeah, you can't just run which I'm sure many of you do, like really innovative programs, but you can't like reach millions of people with them. Yeah. So how do you do that in a cost-effective way? And this is the kind of challenges that we try to tackle in this project. And the kind of answer to this that I saw was social media. To use the massive reach of social media as a way to reach more people and to do that in a cost-effective way. Now, of course, hold on, social media, is that the end or the savior of democracy? We usually, and it is certainly a threat. It is certainly challenging democracy because it does provide a lot of opportunities for misinformation and biases. But I think that we should not underestimate the power that social media has and to kind of turn this potential of social media that is used to harm democracy. But we need to also think about how can we counter this, to use the platforms in a positive way. The advantage that I see when I think about social media and when I say using social media, I think about advertisement campaigns in the same way that many businesses, new local businesses, use advertisement on social media. They can tailor it to specific audiences. You have a new restaurant that you open, you want to kind of let everybody here in Glasgow know about it. You have a new product that is really like revolutionary for women. You want to reach all the women, never mind all the men. They don't have to see your advertisement, right? Social media has this capacity. It reaches billions of people that are active on these platforms from every social background and countries. People use it very regularly. The other advantage of using advertisement on social media is that it circumvents state control. We have unfortunately more and more countries where the media is not free anymore, where free speech is more and more restricted and civil liberties. But the advertisement space and just generally posting on these international platforms, that's still much more difficult for autocracies to control. And the problem is they sometimes shut it down if they are not really happy and they want to kind of circumvent the potential, kind of mobilizing force of social media to coordinate people. But to censor content on social media, especially paid content, that's really tricky for autocracies. And what I will show you is that doing this kind of work in countries that are backsliding or authoritarian is just as effective and probably even more important. Right? And so this is why I see a big advantage of using this kind of method. Sorry. Just to kind of show you a bit what I'm talking about when I talk about reach. So this is a map of the world with all the with the number of regular Facebook users per country. Yeah. So I mean, we have India in here with, of course, that's a huge population. But most countries have at least a few million users that are active on these platforms, and that's just Facebook and Instagram. Here you see the same kind of information, but just as a proportion of the population. Yeah. So, how many people, what's the proportion of a population that is active? And you see that Americas is very well covered, and so is most of Europe. Yeah. So in Europe, where of course most of your organizations will be active, you really reach a large proportion of the population, which means also all these groups, the older disinterested women, that we need to get into this debate as well. Yeah, you will find them on Facebook. It's sometimes difficult to find them for maybe more in-person events. So this is basically what we're trying to use here. Yeah, we can reach a lot of people. So how did we do that then? We were interested in conducting our study in many different countries. And when I say different, I'm talking about what's the level of democracy in a country. This is here measured with an index from the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Gothenburg. So 0 means it's basically an autocracy, and it goes up to 1. And then we have here the UN Human Development Index. So this is about kind of economic development, social development. And you see that we have huge spread. Yeah, we have countries that are very developed and very democratic, and up to kind of countries that are very autocratic and less developed. You already see kind of with the labels here that we, for practical reasons, we focused on countries that speak English or Spanish. So that's usually the former colonies of Spain and the UK. And then we also included Turkey as a kind of key case study here, just because Turkey is an important authoritarian regime. So we included that as well. So this is the setup. Yeah, we wanted to run our educational interventions in different countries to see where does it work and where it doesn't. What we then did is we purchased advertisement on social media. And this is here an example advertisement, how it looks like, asking people to participate in a survey. So I'm presenting you the 2 main studies here. One, where we use this approach, where we recruited our research participants on social media, so they're social media users, yeah. But then we took them out of the platform in a more controlled environment, where we then programmed our survey in Qualtrics, in case you're familiar with this. And we kind of use that more controlled environment of exposing people to our educational interventions, but we then learned more about them. We could ask them more questions and so on. And then I'm presenting you at the end one more study that we conducted in Turkey, where we directly did the content on the social media platform as paid advertisement. Yeah, I'm going to come back to this, because this is, of course, a bit of an artificial way, right? We kind of take people out of the platform instead of like showing it directly while they're scrolling. That's slightly different. This approach allowed us to recruit, kind of over 90,000 people in the 33 countries that are part of our study. And it's obviously not representative, but none of our interventions in person and so on will not be representative, right? We still have many more of the kind of more disadvantaged, hard to reach populations in there, though. So this is the setup. By the way, I should probably give a shout out to another session that NECE is running as the online campus. For my colleague Aykut Öztürk, in I think 2 weeks, right, will run a practical session of how to set up advertisement on Meta to help you also learn about kind of how to work with the advertisement manager to do exactly this. Yeah, I mean, not like recruiting necessarily people what we did here, but just to circulate your content through a paid advertisement. So what did we do then? We were interested in testing the effectiveness of civic education, of trying to promote democracy, and really from a kind of purely educational, like approach. They were short, like 3-minute videos. They were animated with like voiceovers and positive like background music. It was really about kind of being informative, positive, upbeat, and so on. We left the content really abstract. We talked about democracies and non-democracies in general because we ran these, videos in all these different countries. So we didn't want to, evoke people like thinking about their country and their politics and their parties and the leader that they didn't like or they did like. And so we kept it very abstract. We have only one country comparison in here, which is Lithuania and Belarus, which is quite detached from all these English, Spanish speaking countries. So they didn't necessarily have strong priors, like ideas about these cases, but they helped us to illustrate Lithuania taking a path of democracy, while Belarus remained a dictatorship. Yeah, so it helped us to create a more like kind of look what happened in Lithuania compared to the dictatorship in Belarus. Given that we are just producing videos here, that actually allowed us to test also different messages. Yeah, because I think the other challenge when we think about civic education and promoting democracy is what content do we need? Yeah, so it's not just about the method of reaching more people in a cost-effective way, but it's also to know what's the best argument. How do you reach people to convince them, to persuade them that democracy is good and that they should defend it? So what we did is we produced 3 different videos, one focusing on civil, social, and economic rights. Then this is really about kind of the liberal aspect of democracy. Yeah. Then we had one video that focused on the institutions and kind of especially kind of independent parliaments and courts and how they are important for upholding democracy. Yeah, that they're key. Of how do they work? Yeah, in that system of democracy. So this is purely like kind of the core of democracy. Yeah, the kind of liberal aspects, the institutional aspect. But then we also tried a third way, which is the economic and social output produced by democratic systems. So democracies generally are better at producing economic growth because there's more certainty. They're better at producing public goods. They're better at protecting the environment, these kind of things. Yeah. And so we also had one video kind of making these arguments. You live in a democracy, you're better off. Yeah. So this is more an instrumental way of looking at democracy. So it's not about like your rights are protected, like, no, you will be better off. Yeah. And of course, like, a lot of people think, well, that's probably the argument that works best because ultimately it's all about economics. Yeah. So we come back to this. And then we had a fourth video, which is basically our placebo. Yeah. So this is like when you think about like a medical experiment, that would be the sugar pill. Yeah. So you have your cancer drug that you're trialing. So this is our cancer drug. And then we have the sugar pill, which is a short video explaining the advantages of space exploration. And so what we want to know is people watching something about space exploration, they are kind of our control group. And then, did we move the, people's democratic attitudes and behavior by showing them something about democracy? Yeah, that's the setup of the experiment. So people were then randomly assigned to watch one of these videos, and then we had our outcome measures. I don't think we have time now. I'm happy to kind of, at the end, if you want to, I have a link here to our rights video. So here's just a few stills of how this looks like. So as I said, these are animations. They are very abstract and not very country specific, except this kind of one here. Here we compare how the freedom of expression as a core civil liberty developed in Lithuania and Belarus in the kind of past 30 years. But apart from this, it's all kind of this style. Yeah, with like also we have the subtitles here and so on. I'm happy for you to have a look at this if you have time. But let me first show you some of the evidence. Yeah, so that's the setup. Yeah, we expose people randomly to these videos. Did this make a difference? Sorry. Okay, so here's some results. This compares like we have like different outcomes that we were interested in. So this for example, is a question like, how important is it for you to live in a democracy? And then I show you the percentage who say that in the control group, so those that watch the space exploration, compared to those that watch the democracy videos. It's interesting that most people actually do want to live in a democracy. Yeah. So, I mean, this is also what I say, right? Dictators know that. This is where they claim to be democratic, yeah, where they are defenders of democracy. So democracy is popular, yeah, in abstract, in general, with 81% even in the control group saying yes, they want to live in a democracy. But we do see a slight increase in this after for those that watched our videos. The other question we have here, and that is also really important because that's a very abstract question, right? We had multiple questions asking whether people think it is okay to have a strong man who doesn't have to bother with parliament and elections, or whether it's okay just to have one party in power, or whether the military is in power. Yeah, so these kind of different types of authoritarianism. And what you see here is, and I find that actually a bit shocking, especially as, you know, everybody seems to wanting to live in a democracy, but then only 38% actually reject all these other alternatives to democracy. Yeah, that are much more concrete, right? Democracy is a big abstract term. But we did kind of increase this with our videos. And that is quite, you know, I mean, we're talking here about a 6% increase from this, from the control videos, that people reject these other forms of authoritarianism. Yeah. We also have something about knowledge. So whether people understand what is actually core, what's the essential for a country to be democratic. We also increased democratic knowledge here, and we had a slight positive effect also on political participation. Okay, so, and then there's one more kind of, I think, important finding here, which is in a lot of countries, we're very worried about polarization, and which is really challenging our democracies with, you know, with more and more voters being very passionate about their side and really despising the other side. Yeah, that's what we call affective polarization. And what we have shown in our research is that if people are very polarized, and we've seen that now in the US, right, with you know, kind of the Democrats and the Republicans really truly hating each other. In these cases, voters who are very passionate and polarized are much more willing to tolerate democratic violations of their candidates. And that's a problem, right? We need to see that people kind of abandon their partisanship in defense of democracy. And this is why we try to measure this, and we call it defending democracy, because that's the ultimate act, right? You vote against your partisanship because your candidate is trying to challenge democracy. And what you see here is we measure how polarized individuals are. Yeah, so they're not polarized at all. They don't really mind. They think all parties are okay, versus those that have these very strong feelings. And what you see here is we gave them like a choice. Okay, here's your candidate. You know, you're a Republican. There's a Republican candidate who is doing something undemocratic versus a Democratic candidate doing something you know, kind of in defense of democracy. How likely are you to vote against your own partisanship? If people are not polarized, they are more likely to actually vote against their partisanship. The more polarized they are, the less likely they are to vote against their partisanship. But what you see here is the solid line is basically the placebo, the control video. But for those that watched our videos about democracy, we could diminish this effect quite a bit. Yeah, so it's still there. Polarization is, you can't get rid of it, but at least we can dampen it a bit. Yeah, so I mean, this is after watching one video for like 3 minutes, right? And we already see this effect that people understand more to maybe I should not vote for this candidate, even so that's my party, but in this way I trump democracy over partisanship. So this is again an important finding that that challenges democracies. I'm not gonna. I'm just. This just summarizes what I just showed you. Of course, a big question is, and I just said that, right? People watch a video for 3 minutes, and then kind of right after, this, I asked them, what do you want to live in a democracy? What do you think about, a strongman rule and all this, right? So this is a bit artificial, and this kind of intermediate, like immediate effect, right? Sure, it's there. But what we wanted to know is, how long does this effect actually last? And so we, in Turkey, we contacted our respondents again for a period of 3 weeks. And what you see here is, this is the effect, the statistical effect, yeah, of having watched a video about democracy versus about space on the outcome to live in a democracy or rejecting authoritarianism. Yeah. And you see here, like this, these bars here is basically whether this effect is significant, whether it's meaningful. And if it crosses 0, then I'm not sure anymore whether, this effect is actually significant. What you see is that, up to about 2 weeks, my confidence intervals do not overlap with 0, meaning that we still see meaningful, significant effects of these videos even 2 weeks later. Yeah. And so this, we kind of, this is completely different. We asked for their email address and phone number. We only asked these 2 questions. But that means if we run this campaign at crucial periods, when people are exposed to like, for example, in an election, yeah, where, an authoritarian leader is trying to get re-elected, and we just show them the videos about, kind of, this is how democracy works, we can still see these effects days later, that maybe people are more able to understand what democracy is and rejecting a strongman rule, for example. Okay, just kind of quickly summarizing, we also can look at whether these kind of videos work better for some people or not. And what we find is that they have a greater effect among younger people and less politically interested voters, which is great news, because that's exactly the people that we want to reach. Yeah, those that we often have problems reaching with other means. So you see here, for example, that the effect among the young is stronger and then gets weaker among the older people. Yeah. Then, as I said, we had, for the moment, I showed you results where we were just pulling together, all the different videos that we produced to look, kind of compare. You watched a video about democracy versus you watched a video about space. What you kind of, but the question, of course, is which arguments, works better. And as I said before, when I introduced this, many people actually expect the kind of video that focuses on the performance of democracy as kind of providing for economic and public goods to be better. However, what we find is that the other 2 videos are much stronger, are much more impactful, which I think is good news. Yeah, it means that when we want to convince people about democracy, let's talk about what democracy is. Yeah, it's about institutions, it's about the protection of individual rights and liberties. This is what kind of people mostly internalize based on our research. And we have done more on this because it was a bit puzzling, but I can quite confidently say that you don't have to convince people that if you live in a democracy, you can buy more. Convince them about the intrinsic value of democracy and how it works, because a lot of people do not understand this, unfortunately, anymore. Staying on the tune about kind of how to sell democracy, especially in autocracies, which, unfortunately, more and more of our countries going this way. So we need to think about, like, what's the best frame here? Yeah, because for a lot of civil society organizations, working in autocratic regimes is really difficult. You can get criminalized, you can be imprisoned even, but if you try to criticize the ruling party and so on. And so the question is, and then of course, there's a lot of political propaganda and polarization in a lot of autocracies. So if we're trying to then make a counter argument of challenging the regime, we could even strengthen partisan identities as a kind of backlash effect. Yeah. And so in these environments, conducting civic education is really, really tricky. So the question is, how do we then do it, and especially given the challenge that there is a lot of misconceptions about what the regime being democratic or not. Just to show you, give an example of this. This is some data from Turkey. Yeah, here the gray bars show how democracy developed in Turkey since the 2000s. Yeah, and unfortunately, especially after the coup in 2016, democracy really declined, and Turkey is now considered an electoral autocracy. Yeah. Here, these lines show you this question: how democratic is Turkey? Yeah, and if you see this top line here, these are the voters of Erdogan, AKP voters. Yeah, those that support the regime. And still today, on a scale from 0 to 10, yeah, they think that Turkey is democratic. The opposition has understood that Turkey is not democratic anymore. Yeah, so that's the problem. Yeah, you have people that think they live in a democracy, even so they objectively, at least how we measure this as academics, is not a democracy anymore. The opposition understands it, regime voters don't. Yeah, but this image of the country being democratic, of course, helps the regime to legitimize its power. So this is what we have to do. That's the challenge, right? How do you do that? And so what we tried here is we used our videos about rights and liberties, but we produced two different versions of it. We had one version which was, kind of a very positive message. It was about, if you live in a democracy, this is what you gain. This is what you get. Democracy gives you freedom. Yeah. It's very happy, it's positive. The music was even more kind of, it was the same kind of abstract, nothing about Turkey in there, just a slightly different tone and frame. And then we also produced the same, like, kind of counter argument, like, if you don't live in a democracy, you're going to lose your freedoms. You see, it's like the same argument. You, in a democracy, you gain freedoms, versus you will lose it if you don't live in a democracy. And so what we wanted to see is not just what content, what frame matters in terms of focusing more on institutions or rights, but also what's the tone? Be positive or be negative? And so what you see here is have two outcomes here. One being Turkey is democratic. Yeah. In the control video, 38% say that Turkey is democratic. No change when they watch this negative video. Yeah, but a huge drop for those that watched a positive video. Yeah, meaning if we tell people in a context like Turkey, if you live in a democracy, you get rights. They understand. We actually show that in other data as well. They really make that connection. We show that the positive videos really evoke people to think much more about the current situation in Turkey. And what we also show is we ask them, how likely are you to vote for the incumbent? Yeah, look at this. In the control videos, 37% said they would vote for the incumbent. This dropped to 29%. That's a huge drop. Yeah. We show also with some statistical analysis that here, this effect that people reduced their support for the regime is basically because they understood that Turkey is not democratic. Yeah. So this is kind of these results for me are really striking. Explaining people what democracy is in the abstract made people realize my country is not democratic. And this is the same for regime voters and opposition voters. This effect is exactly the same. Yeah. This realization that Turkey is not as democratic as they thought helped to reduce electoral support for the incumbent. Yeah. And this is exposing people to a short video. So I find these results really, really important and powerful. So I have just one last thing I wanted to show you before we can then go into the Q&A. So far, I told you that the way we conducted these experiments was in a controlled way, right? We recruited people on social media, but then we took them out of the platform and exposed them to the video, and then asked them afterwards these questions that I showed you, like as outcome questions now. But of course, the question is, does that actually work in the real world? So what we did is we teamed up with an organization called Vote and Beyond, which is a Turkish organization that is an independent organization that kind of coordinates and trains all the independent election monitors in Turkey. So they've been operating for a bit more than 10 years now. In the 2023 election, for example, they recruited about 200,000 monitors and volunteers to help with this important process to help make the election, more democratic. It's a form of volunteering and probably similar to also what maybe some of your organizations are trying to do, right? You're trying to recruit volunteers for your work, for your projects, and so on. The goal of this particular project was we wanted to compare the traditional ways of recruiting volunteers. So they have, of course, massive email lists from their previous volunteers. They did media coverage, some kind of press conferences and so on. And they have a lot of followers on their social media pages. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, these kind of, like a lot. So they were kind of posting generic kind of come and volunteer for us again through the emails and followers and so on. And then we wanted to compare this traditional way of reaching people to running a paid social media campaign. And so this is how the campaign looked like. So you see here, paid for by the organization. This was like a reel with like different pictures. They designed this. This is all them. Yeah. And for example, it says here, like, let's protect the ballots together, join us. This is about democracy. You see here, kind of, they really had that kind of pro-democracy message. They had little videos that were also embedded here and so on. So this is like a proper, people scroll through their like Facebook and Instagram and they come, across something like this. Yeah, so this is more real. So how did we try to then establish whether there is a causal effect here? We took Turkey and there's about 900 districts in Turkey. We had the list of districts and we just randomly assigned each district to be a control district, meaning they don't get any paid social media advertisement, and a treatment district, so that's the red triangles here, and they got the paid advertisement. This is very similar to what I was explaining with, there's a new restaurant in Glasgow. You don't want to, don't want to pay advertisement in London to say, we opened this great new restaurant in Glasgow. You want to pay advertisement just here in the surroundings, right? So Facebook allows you this to do local, geographically contained advertisement, and that's what we used here. So we could, for each of the districts that were in treatment, we could just say, here we're putting money in. We're showing everybody who lives and uses social media in these districts, they're going to see the advertisement, but the others don't. And here's the results. These are the control districts, so they didn't get social media advertisement, yeah? And of course, they had some recruitment in these. So we had a 2-week campaign, a few weeks kind of before the election happened, just at the start of when they started recruiting volunteers. So these are people who came through the newsletter, the mailing list, the generic posting on social media and so on, yeah? And these are the numbers for the treated districts. So these, you can see that, there's more total signups. There's also more first-time volunteers. That's really important, right? Recruiting your old volunteers is easier, but how do you get new ones to come in? And we also see that there's more people who actually refer to social media as a way to knowing about this campaign and becoming a volunteer. So again, this is very positive here that, with kind of, this is about a 21% increase here in recruitment of volunteers by running a social media campaign. And then interestingly, the effects were stronger in the most deprived areas. And as a civil society organization, especially working in an authoritarian context, you often are more contained to urban places. Yeah, it's much easier to reach people. But how do you recruit volunteers in the periphery, in the rural areas? And so this is where what we see, where social media campaigns can be particularly helpful. And we also see that they are stronger in the kind of more opposition strongholds as well. Okay, with this, I'm gonna kind of just stop by summarizing what I was trying to kind of convince you here with our research, showing you, evidence from, proper experiments. These low-cost civic education intervention, in our case, short little videos, can strengthen democratic resilience by making people understand more what democracy is, value it more, and also we had some questions about donating to civil society organizations. There is some evidence also about engagement. These kind of intervention can easily be scaled online using platforms like Facebook and Instagram, but there's of course others as well. Meta is not doing its greatest at the moment, so I understand that maybe some people don't want to spend money on Meta, but obviously there's still where most of the people are, unfortunately. And what I also showed you is that these kind of interventions are especially impact in more politically fragile or polarized environments where they probably are most needed, where it's very difficult sometimes to reach people. Yeah. And so the conclusion is that, civic education implemented in this kind of very low cost kind of small like little videos can be powerful to counteract democratic backsliding, and in my view is absolutely essential because there's so much misinformation going on these platforms that it needs the democratic voice as well. It's really, really important, and we show with our research that it works, and so that is really exciting. Okay, I leave it here, and hopefully we have a bit of time then for questions.